Fantastic. All right, we'll do some Q&A now. Just raise your hands in the air if you have a question for our panel.
Right, well, I'll get the ball rolling. I've got two questions. Maybe John would be good to answer the first one, but I think it might be good for everybody to have a really good understanding of what is the difference between commercial radio and community radio, and how likely are you as an Australian artist to be played on commercial radio versus community?
The most obvious one are ads. So commercial radio, they base their format on what, it's all about making money. That's what commercial radio is. And so it's much slicker. It's very controlled. Presenters can't decide to play a track that they personally like. It's strictly knuckle down, and that they have target market that they have to shoot for. And the beautiful thing about community radio is that whoever's sitting in that presenter's seat can pretty much play what they like, and it's all very organic and real and not forced, and that's the big difference. So yeah.
Yeah, I should just actually, while we're on this topic, just quickly mention that AMRAP, which I think is probably the greatest service that independent Australian musicians have, aside from triplejnearth.com. So if you service your music through AMRAP, Triple J doesn't get that, because we're not a community radio station. We kind of sit in the middle. We don't have ads, but we're not a community radio station. We're a public broadcast.
Very different thing.
Yes.
BBC.
Exactly.
Community radio is really about independent media and also serving the interests of specific community groups. So, for example, in Sydney, you have 2SER, which has an educational licence. So, their main objective is to be a platform for information and education, especially around the university, which they grew out of, but obviously they've kind of extended that as well to incorporate other kinds of programming. FBI has a youth licence, so they're primarily there to serve youth up to the age of 25, and on FBI you'll hear a lot of the broadcasters have young voices. Community radio stations, there's different communities of interest, and there's actually not very much in the way of government funding, so community radio relies a lot on subscribers and also subscribers or supporters, depending on what you want to call them, and also sponsors as well. So if you guys tune into FBI, for example, you'll hear that every now and then there is a supporter drive where listeners can actually sign up and to kind of pledge some money to the station to get some really great discounts, be in the running for prizes, but also within doing that be supporting the station. So with public radio, they are funded through the government, and commercial radio, it's a completely commercial model. So obviously that's why you're hearing a lot of ads, so they can kind of keep running.
What about actual specs, right? So if I'm sending you a track, are there specs that I need to keep in mind in terms of file size, compression rate, all of these kinds of things? What does my file need to look like once it reaches you guys for it to be able to be played on the radio?
I prefer a WAV file, so a download link to that, because if you attach it to an email, it will bug out because we don't get much inbox space at the ABC. A 320 kilobyte MP3 will work, but I'm a real stickler for audio quality, so I feel like WAV is always the best, because most of the stuff pretty much all our stuff is now played out of our digital system anyway. So you may be thinking in your head, for those who are on Unearth, that the MP3 on there is a 128 kilobit file, which Unearth Digital Radio play out. But if I hear a song on Unearth that I really like, I'll hit up the artist for a WAV file.
I think, John, you mentioned the importance of emphasizing differences in emphasizing your differences as a band or an artist. And I wanted to know, how do you, when not fitting into a trend being synonymous with a radio format, how do you please that radio format and also highlight your differences?
Right, okay. Oh God, trying to please a radio format, that's a really slippery slope. Like you're kind of hoping the music you're going to make is going to fit somewhere. It doesn't always, but I think it just comes back to the honesty of making music that's real and not second guessing too much. I might not be able to directly answer your question, but I had someone recently say to me, Triple J should really like this because what was it? Because we sound like Tame and Parlour and Cloud Control, but they're already playing those two bands. So what do they need? A sound-alike kind of band. So it's not an easy one to answer. You just have to be real in making your music and not trying to fit in somewhere. And hopefully, by doing that, you'll find a place. But it's tough.
I think every band generally starts with wow, I really love that band and you really love that band. Let's start another band that sounds like that band. Like 90% of bands will start like that. Like, you enjoy a certain type of music and it inspires you, so you want to make music like that. Like, that's a general idea. But then it's what you do with that idea that really counts, and how much of yourself that you put into that music. And that's where the difference is between someone who sounds like the next miniature mini Flume, or someone who sounds like they're taking those core ideas but then they're putting themselves into it, and then it doesn't actually sound like what's the word I'm looking for? Derivative. Thank you, Kirsty. It doesn't sound derivative, it sounds original.
Yeah, there's a band, Adelaide band called Bad Dreams. May not heard of them, and I love them. And when I first heard some demos last year, and I thought, oh God, they just sound so. They're just doing what they want to do. They don't fit in anywhere, and because they're compelling and so good, they're getting lots of airplay, and they're just not really part of a scene. They've just done what they wanted to do, and I think that's a good case in point, actually.
So it's familiar enough to be familiar, but different enough to be different. That makes really heaps of sense. Very good thinking, yes.
Yeah, I love the example of someone like Violent Soho, who, while most of the country decided that they would ditch their guitars and buy MPCs and laptops and make music that sounded like Flume, over on the right is this band who is still playing rock music, who don't really give a crap. Who do give a crap because they work really hard, and then all of a sudden, are pulling thousands. Like, I saw them at Groove in the Moo in Canberra a couple of weeks ago, and the tent was heaving. It was packed. All these people going nuts for Violent Soho, and if you had said 12 months ago one of the biggest bands in the country would be like this loud rock band, you'd have been like, you're crazy. Guitars are dead. Rock is dead. But the funny thing is what I found really interesting is that about 3 hours later, that same crowd was there to see Peking Duck, who are two DJs playing banging dance music. So all of a sudden, the lines are blurred between, what people like and what people don't like. Trends are a funny one. I often think of music like architecture, in the sense that a good songwriter, or the best songwriters, will actually respond to their environment. And you can kind of take that in any way you want. I sometimes get called a tastemaker, which I think is ridiculous, because I think tastes, society decides what is going to be popular. Hip-hop was always going to be popular. And that started about 15 years ago, because if you notice, the tempo of popular songs started to slow down, because hip-hop was becoming a more popular genre, and hip-hop is, traditionally like 90, 95 beats per minute. Rock is about 130, 140. Songs started to slow down. I would have had I can't, the people in radio had no choice in that. That's just what was happening. But that's going into a more philosophical discussion about songwriting.
My question, I think Dom, you raised something about you don't get any money if you play your songs. I'm guessing that if by chance afterwards there was any money coming, it'd still come to the artist. What happens with, if it's played on commercial radio, it's taken, if someone else was talking about a special song might be taken up if it's played on commercial radio after, and what happens to the copyright of the song if other people want to sample it if it's already been played on public radio?
Ooh, you're getting into legal aspects here. That's where we need somebody from APRA to talk about. Here. You are the man to really answer this question.
I see you're from APRA, are you, Greg?
Because yeah, you do. I mean, you do earn money from getting played on radio. But Greg will be able to explain more about the legalities and the.
Welcome to the panel.
Yeah, that is a minefield.
In regard to usage of other people's works, you have to get permission for that, regardless of how you want to use that. You need to make sure that you have both the approval of the writer as well as the owner of the sound recording as well. So basically, if anyone's got any APRA questions, come send me again.
But yeah, if you get played on radio, you will earn, a little bit of money. It's not big money. Oh, I think that's streaming. Yeah, it's. God, I don't even know what the breakdowns are for radio play.
It's 0.3% if you get one stream, I think. So yeah, the artist is getting well rogered.
Right, you want to drop yourself in here, mate?
What about if you play it on public radio, and someone else sample you afterwards?
No.
That's for the answer to those questions, I would go to the Australian Copyright Council website, browse by what you do, musician, sampling, you can't do it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Thank you.
Also,
Sorry, Kirsty, I'll bring the mic over.
on the Music New South Wales website is this delightful document called a Music Industry Legal Pack, which talks about all of these kinds of things: sample clearance, mastering agreements, publishing agreements, how they all work. It's a free resource. You should all download it and have a read so you know what not to sign, what your rights are, and when you are possibly infringing on other people's rights as well.
So do you guys prefer the tracks that you get sent in to be properly mastered, or will you play things that have just been mixed down? Because obviously you're going to need them louder, but you've got the fine radio compressors that'll try and make it up to the play level that you guys are wanting. But is it better for you guys to have mastered tracks, or?
Well, it is for me because if it's played on Triple J, then it's going to be played against songs that are also mastered. So if it sounds bad in the ears of the listeners, they'll be like, "Oh, this just doesn't sound good." So for Triple J, yes, definitely.
If you're distributing music to community radio through AMRAP, then yes, things need to be properly mixed and mastered. They need to be radio ready, so it needs to be something that community radio stations will play during the day. So we can't actually add demos or scratchy live recordings or tracks with a lot of distortion in them, because basically stations across the country will listen to it for perhaps 5 seconds and decide not to play it based on the sound quality. But on saying that, sometimes having tracks on community radio that have a super, super slick and shiny sound might be a deterrent for people to play the music as well.
And I imagine that sort of, with the sort of sound quality thing, there's no real hard and fast rules, and that it's probably something where you should just play your CD compared to the music of your favourite artists and compare it that way?
I think so. There are also different rules in the community broadcasting sector as well. For example, if you were a Christian artist and you submitted your music to a Christian station who are kind of part of the community radio sector, they are very, very specific about how you should submit your music and what sort of quality it should be, and they'll actually dismiss anything, even if it's really, really appropriate for their station, if it isn't mastered in a particular way. I don't know the exact details of what they need, but it's very specific.
Yeah, and mastering basically brings all the levels in line, so things aren't just bouncing up too much, because you track it, then you mix it, and your mastering is like the icing on the cake, so it brings all those levels into check, and it's really important because you've got to care enough about your music. It doesn't matter whether anybody actually likes it or not. I suppose it does to you, but you've got to put it out there, and it's fully formed and complete. Yeah.
But in saying that, if your band or the music you're creating and the context for that is appropriate, where it might not be a slick, clean, radio-friendly track, that's not a negative thing for community broadcasting, especially when you come into niche programming and stuff like that. I'm not sure how many of you this would be applicable for, but yeah, like there's quite a lot of bands and genres and artists and stuff where having it a bit rough and ready around the edges is probably more appealing for certain programs and presenters than if it was super mastered. But it's, yeah, again, what's appropriate for your music, what you're creating, how you think it should be received, and also, yeah, having reference points. So like, oh, I would like my albums in the end sort of sound, in terms of quality, like A, B, and C album that I've heard on the radio. That's probably a good reference point to where you want to be.
Yeah, even the stuff that you would listen to, say like the Royal Headache record, which sounds rough as guts, has been mixed and mastered.
Yeah. I won't service a track to radio unless it's mastered, so I'll listen to them in their demo states and when they're developing, but it's got to, for me, it's got to be, yeah, so that's a yes.
Next question here.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm doing Cert 2 at Ultimate Tape. I just wondered if when you send off the track and you send it to different radio stations, would a commercial radio station just send it to a number of commercial radio stations, or is there any way that a commercial station would interact with a community radio station?
In my experiences, no.
No.
Definitely not, unfortunately.
I think unless, maybe I'm simplifying here, I probably am, but unless you're signed to a major label, commercial probably won't touch you, will they? Not
absolutely, but yeah, I don't think actually a lot of commercial stations are really aware of what community radio stations are in their own city, and often whether I'm in Melbourne or in Brisbane and I'm at a community station, I said I've just been a Triple Z to a Triple M guy, or I've been a Triple R to a person at Nova, and they go just look at me, a little confused. What are you doing? In
regional areas, it's a bit different, because in regional areas, often the role of commercial radio and the role of community radio are semi-similar in super regional areas, but in in urban areas, very, 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 very different. Community radio stations often talk to each other, not necessarily directly, but either through sector organisations such as AMRAP or through just other presenters. You all kind of, if you do a certain program that covers a certain type of music, who does programs with similar types of music across Australia, not just that's always a sneaky thing. You're like, okay, my program is on a Sunday night. This guy's show in Sydney at FBI that I really liked is on a Monday night. I'm going to see what he played in his show to see if there's anything that I've missed from Sydney. And they're going to look at your show and vice versa. So there is that element of sharing, especially in community radio, but not across that different sectors.
Essentially, in commercial radio and community radio have really different agendas, and they're on a different path, which is really good actually, but good question.
I mean, commercial radio is basically a business. They run it like a business. So it's different for them. But you're right, I know, Alice Springs, for example, their commercial radio station is quite, it's Alice Springs, there's hardly anybody there. So, the people who work for the commercial station know the community radio station people.
Apologies to everyone from Alice Springs who's here today.
I love Alice Springs. Just want to put that out there. Beautiful place in the world.
There was the agenda of community radio was just brought up then. I feel quite comfortable in stating that the agenda is being rad.
Always.
I just wanted to say on that point as well, because that's a really fantastic question. If you look at the ARIA charts, currently I think, Say Geronimo is maybe the #1 played song in the country at the moment, and they are the first band since Cosima DeVito from Australian Idol to reach #1 on an independent record label.
You mean Shepherd?
Shepherd, that's who they are. So Say Geronimo song. That one. So anyway, so how long ago was Cosima DeVito, and who can even remember?
It was 2003, because I remember.
There you go. So that is a really solid indication of how much commercial radio gives a shit about independent artists.
Did you see her at Westfields?
No, I never did the Westfields Australian Idol sessions. No one ever came to the Gold Coast. Because I don't think, there wasn't a Westfield there until 2010. So, I'm not kidding.
Hey guys, for artists or bands who would like to get as much exposure out of radio as possible, obviously getting a single on rotation or their album played regularly is great, but could you maybe talk about the other kind of opportunities that are available, such as live performances, interviews, stuff like that artists can use to kind of bolster themselves a bit more, and how one would go about actually contacting a station to get that happening?
when you approach a community radio station, especially if you've noticed that they've actually played one of your tracks on radio, which you can do, a lot of community radio stations, especially the metro ones, have interactive playlists which AMRAP built, which show you in great detail every single track that's been played, so artist name, track name, and then also videos, links and that sort of stuff. So it's really easy to find out if you've been played across radio. For community radio, we also have something which is called an airplay search, where you can you set up an account, it's free, and you actually can just type your name into a box and it comes up with all of the stations who have AMRAP pages, so these interactive playlists across Australia who have played your music. So it's a work in progress, but it kind of shows you everything. So I'm kind of tangenting a little bit there, but basically the best thing to do is just to really offer yourself up for things at the station. So contact a broadcaster who's played your music or who is playing something in the genre that you're playing and say, hey, I'm going to be in town next week. Can I come in and do a live-to-air performance and an interview? And keep them in the loop about what's happening. You basically want to give broadcasters a reason to play your music, and giving them some additional content to go with their show makes their job a lot easier. So you're kind of helping them with filling in some airtime and actually, having some live bits and pieces on their show. The other one is to have a look out for other opportunities across specific stations that, as musicians, you can get involved in. For example, FBI has a Music Open Day in which you can go along and submit a demo. I think it's on the last Monday of every single month. So there are quite a few. First Monday of every single month. Definitely worth having a look around and seeing what else you can get involved in.
Can I jump into that? I just want to mention ABC stations that are not double or triple J. They're really good for bands and artists. I've got a guy called Jackson McLaren. He's rootsy, folky. He's based in Melbourne. The other day I had him in Melbourne ABC doing a down the line TARDIS interview with ABC Warrnambool. And I got an email today from the ABC in Adelaide local station saying, hey, we just played one of his album tracks and got a really good result. And I went, oh, cool. Do you want to do an interview? Because he's heading that way. They go, yeah, cool. So that's a really nice place for a lot of artists to go to. Also, if it's if the music fits and the demographics right. So we've been talking a lot about community radio, J's and commercial radio, but there's that whole ABC sector that's really good, and they also have album features like. Radio National has a breakfast one. The ABC on the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, they syndicate. They have a morning or breakfast album of the week, and they always do interviews when an artist is heading through there. So there's real kinds of that's a great way to for an act to build their profile and connect to an audience that actually like because the audience is older, so therefore. They're up for buying music. They'll invest. Well, wow, they'll buy an album. Isn't that shocking these days? Yeah, they'll buy a CD and they'll go to the gig and, they'll buy a T-shirt or a Frisbee or a beer cooler and all that. And that's actually how Dan Sultan really started to rise. His third album was out recently. I worked in his first two and it was Community and really heavy ABC. And that's where it kind of really first started going through and some home and hosed. And that's how Dan developed from that real grassroots community radio and sort of older ABC, so that could be it.
This one might be a quick one. It's been addressed in various ways, so maybe it's a little bit of a mop-up. I've seen a number of bands over the years list 20, 50, 100 radio stations with their emails and phone numbers on their website or social media saying, hey, all of our fans, help us get airplay. Hammer these guys, tell them to play our song. And I thought, usually that's not one of the best artists in the world for starters, but sometimes they're okay. But I think the legitimate part is for bands that are hoping to get noticed across the clutter, I think the number one thing is be great. But aside from that, is there a way to get noticed throughout the clutter of bands trying to get your attention? If you notice anything that works, because you said like the grandiose press kit is kind of silly now, right?
Yeah, look, again, it just comes down to a great song. Street teams I always laugh at. I love the ones who evidently have been told that the song is going to get played and to text in their support. And so they will text in going, I just heard you play such and such a song. What a great song. I'm like, I'm not playing it for another 20 minutes. Or the ones that all come in at the same time, they always try to be a bit sneaky. They're like, what was that song you played? That sounded really good. It's like, I can tell what you're trying to do. You can always tell the people who genuinely are connecting with the song just as opposed to the people who are friends with the band. Or, you know, or there is a small core fan base who text in a lot. But yeah, it just comes down to having that really amazing song. If it sounds hard, that's because it is.
There's a really good example of mass fan base backfiring. There was a huge controversy back in, I think, 2011. 4ZZZ in Brisbane have the Hot 100 every year that they do on New Year's Day. And there was one band who had 4 songs in the Hot 100. So if you're a subscriber of that station, of 4ZZZ, you could vote for your favourite songs that were played throughout the year, and there was sort of a fill-out form. They've changed it now because of this. But a band that had been played, I think, twice across 12 months on 4ZZZ managed to get I think in the top 10 with 4 consecutive evenly voted songs. So obviously they had enough fans who voted, all of them, for these 4 songs that this band had put into the Hot 100. So what that meant, realistically, was that these guys had a lot of really, really hardcore fans who were willing to vote for these 4 songs, and everyone had voted for 4 songs as well. So now they've changed, changed the rules, so you have to be played like at least 10 times across the year and stuff like that. But there was this, do you reward this band for having really dedicated fans, even though that's not a accurate representation of what's been happening on the radio station the past 12 months. So don't bombard anybody with anything, because it will always be negative.
Don't spam.
Don't
Your
spam.
words to live by. That's why I'm no longer allowed in Disneyland.
Next question. Yes, thank you. Say the presenter does want to play the song of the band. Is it possible to get the radio presenter to promote upcoming gigs?
For me, yes, I'll do that. Sometimes it's a bit hard during the day just because they're playing a lot more songs. I always like to. I always feel like that gives a bit more of a local aspect to my show. I should mention, while I had this opportunity, and I'll try to be very quick with it, getting playlisted isn't the be-all and end-all at Triple J. A lot of people think that it is, but for a show like mine, like I mentioned before, I choose everything I play, so do all the specialist shows. But the daytime presenters and the weekend presenters, you shouldn't forget the weekend presenters, they get 2 song choices an hour. So if somebody really gets behind your music, like let's say like Louis McCurdy, for example, loves more like kind of left field electronic music. And so even though your song might not get playlisted, you may end up getting played 20 times over a 4 or 5 months period, which can almost be more than a song that's on low rotation. So when you're thinking about sending in your music to Triple J, don't always think I need to get this song playlisted in order to get on Triple J, because there will be presenters who will play your music. And that's where it's also good to listen to the station, or really any station. It comes back to what was mentioned before, and have a listen and target those presenters. Like if you're a metal band, you probably don't want to send it to Zan in the morning, but you'd want to send it to our metal show. You might find that there's music that Zan or Louis really connect with, and you might feel like you fit into that similar world, and you send it to them as well. So don't limit yourself.
As far as mentioning live shows on the air, I love doing it on my radio show, and it really is dependent on the presenter and how much time they have, as Dom mentioned. But the other thing about it is with community radio, with shows where especially specialist music shows, a lot of the people listening are really intense fans of that style of music, which is, of course, why they're listening. So they're going to be pretty inclined to actually head out to a show. So giving that information is actually doing the listeners of my show, for example, they really want that information so that they can kind of go out and see this music live as well.
Yeah, certainly. Let as many radio presenters know about any shows you're doing. Here's our final question.
Sorry to be the last one.
Better be good.
It's probably more of a question to Brooke, but AMRAP provides a really good service for unsigned artists. And I was wondering if you had any sort of feedback on how well artists do through community radio to then progress to commercial radio. do you sort of get in a lot of feedback from that, seeing how the artists do on sort of a basic level rather than, and then being able to progress to a commercial radio level?
It's difficult to say for commercial radio. One of our services through AirIt, you actually, as an unsigned artist, you go through an application process. It's kind of like applying for a grant where you submit it's not as long-winded as applying for like an OSCO grant, but you basically submit details about your release and about your plans so that we can actually see if you're going to be able to use the service in an appropriate way and make the most of it and make the most of having your music out there. So through that process, I've actually seen quite a few artists come through who have had, a little bit of commercial radio airplay, and then they've tried to come back the other way and get community radio airplay, which to me was quite surprising because I figured once you had commercial radio airplay, it'd sort of be the thing. But there is no clear path, basically, between community, public, and commercial radio. It's really just, I reckon, about working incredibly hard and building those relationships from the ground up and slowly making that jump across. The other thing to remember is that not every single artist works on every single kind of radio. So an artist who has a real commercial sound will not necessarily work on a community radio station. An artist who is maybe kind of a bit of a rough around the edges blues and roots artist definitely will not work on commercial radio. So it's really about picking your audience and picking the station and the style of radio that's right for your music.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Please thank our panel here for tuning in your time. Radio from the Right Profile, John Zugo, Triple J, Damalesio, from Triple R, Michael Grace, and from AMRAP, Book Olsen. I'm Danny Chimbley from the CBAA. Thanks to our guest Greg from AMRAP. Who just sort of